Missed that one. It's got buggies in it. We'll give it to the turkeys. Our Thanksgiving turkeys are getting pretty good sized. They're so funny. Obviously that's more than just for Thanksgiving, as I mean, we actually usually do cook 2 turkeys at Thanksgiving because we have so many people, but that will also just be for other uses. We try to schedule it in such a way that we can actually process and butcher and not have to freeze them before we cook for Thanksgiving. It doesn't always work out that way, and these guys are growing really fast, and I think that's probably just from being on pasture. They're getting a lot of garden scraps, and the food that we feed them is really good, and so there's a very good chance these are going to have to be processed in like October. So I love sharing my garden snacks with them though. Alright guys, I just picked a nice little collection of sweet, thick red peppers. So I've got Marconi reds in here, Lesia, and a Varsky. So a few different, very similar flavor. I mean, they're gonna have different flavor profiles, but they're very similar peppers in that they're not spicy, they're not thin, they're very thick and meaty. And I am about to put all of these in a colander, wash them, de-seed them, and lay them out on cookie sheets to roast them. Well, I've made a glorious mess here. I'll get all of this cleaned up, and all of these seeds and scraps I'm just gonna go out and throw to probably the pigs. When I have pepper scraps that are hot peppers, I give them to the birds, like chickens or turkeys. Pigs do taste heat, birds do not, and so you can actually feed hot peppers to birds and it's not going to bother them, whereas I try not to. I mean, like, the pigs can smell it, so obviously, like, I don't worry that much about it. They probably would eat it, but I typically try not to throw them like really spicy pepper scraps. But I like throwing things out in the pig yard just because I like volunteers. So when I have a bunch of scraps like this, there's a lot of seeds. You could save these seeds, by the way. If you were cutting peppers and you were taking the seeds out, you could just lay these out on a paper towel until they're dry enough to put in an envelope and marked. But since these are multiple different varieties and I'm not trying to save seeds from them, I'm going to throw them out to the pigs and maybe end up next year having some volunteer peppers growing out in the woods, which I think is fun. Now this, I'm just going to drizzle these with some avocado oil and then I'll flip them over. And I'm just going to roast these at 350 for about 40 minutes. I use these Stoneware pans. It's what I roast any sort of veggies on. I like these. I get them from Pampered Chef. My friend Samantha sells Pampered Chef. I do have a link for, she'll do like Roots Refuge parties and stuff like that. I think other brands make Stoneware. I like the Pampered Chef stuff. It's made in the United States, but I like roasting on Stoneware because it doesn't burn things as much. It will typically dehydrate things before it burns them. And I've used Stoneware for probably about 10 years now. As a slightly forgetful cook, it's a real benefit to me to have something that gives me a little wiggle room if I forget something in the oven for a little longer than I intend to leave it in there. So that's where the stones come from. But you could do this on a glass pan, you could do it on a metal pan. I would just watch it to make sure that it's not burning. And if it were burning, you could take it out earlier, or you could bump the heat down a little bit. But what I'm looking for is for these to just be thoroughly roasted. I don't mind a couple of like blackened bits on them. That's gonna add flavor, but obviously I'm not looking to like blacken them throughout. You can season the peppers. I'm not going to because I'm making these to go in a sauce for pasta, so I'm just gonna stick them in the oven and roast them with just the oil on them. Alright, I pulled one tray out at 40 minutes. I put the other tray back in for just a few because the bottom of my oven doesn't heat as fast as the top does. So this is what we're looking for. A little bit of darkened bits. There's some black bits here on the edges, but obviously they're not burned by any means. So I'm going to take these roasted peppers and put them in my food processor with a quart of tomatoes, and then I'm going to cook some Italian sausage with onions and garlic, and then put that sauce in it and simmer it on low for probably about an hour to do like a bolognese. And then I'll toss that with some gluten-free pasta and put cheese on it for my family, and that's what we'll have for dinner tonight. But roasting peppers like this is a really good way to use the harvest and make things easier. So I could take these right now and I could put them in a jar and put oil on top of them and stick them in the fridge, and they would last months that way. And then I could just take out 1 or 2 pieces and cut it up and scramble it with eggs or put it in a quiche or frittata or whatever. I like having a jar and oil in the fridge if I'm gonna do something kind of on the fly. That's why I go to eggs as an example for that, because usually that's something I'm cooking without much forethought. But with these, if you're wanting to make something like I'm making pasta tonight, which you're going to use a lot of these, you can pre-roast them like this and then put them in a freezer bag, or even better, vacuum seal them and put them in the freezer. And then at any point you can pull those out and use them in a recipe. You can freeze red peppers like this not roasted, but for me, when I'm doing preserving, if at all possible, I like to do the work steps on the front end of putting it up to make it easier for me when I'm cooking dinner. Because typically when I'm trying to use the stuff out of my freezer, I'm trying to do it for meals. So I'd rather do the time-saving stuff while I'm preserving rather than while I'm trying to cook a meal. Now I know this isn't quite a recipe, but I'm gonna show you essentially what I'm doing because it is very simple. Somebody shared a meme with me the other day that said, I just hate it when people start talking about their easy dinners and then they start chopping an onion. I'm guilty of that. This isn't a relatively easy dinner, or at least, you know, a doable dinner that's not gonna take your entire day. But I've got onions and garlic in here. I already browned the meat, moved it to the side, and the onions and the garlic are softening up in the middle. I've got the peppers as well as a quart of tomatoes. I'm gonna blend these two together in the food processor, and after the onions are soft, I'm gonna add that in here. As well as, I need to go out and grab them, but some oregano, thyme, rosemary, maybe a little bit, and basil from the garden. Just gonna get a lot of good herbs and mix it into that. And actually, it's afternoon right now. Jeremiah took the little kids out for day with Dad, and I'm making this ahead of time I'm gonna simmer it for a while. We can heat this back up later and just boil noodles. That way I can have my time this evening when it's cooling off in the garden. Here is a little tip that I had been using home canned stuff for way longer than I want to admit before I realized that any can opener has an attachment to pop the lids off these cans. So you can stop prying it with a butter knife or the edge of the counter or any other number of destructive things, your fingernails. Or maybe it was just me. I didn't realize you could open cans with a can opener for way longer than I really want to tell you. So I could add another quart of tomatoes to this to make it more saucy and stretch it. I am going to turn the heat down to low and let this just kind of simmer. It really doesn't have a whole lot to cook down, but I think it'll make the flavors nicer to let them simmer. I'm just going to have to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't start getting too dry. So that's how I'm using my garden food today. How did you use your garden food today? Thank you guys for hanging out with me. I bless you. Until next time.